Hi, we still see a few people joining here, and we'll give it a few seconds before we get started. Okay, so hello and welcome. My name is Jan Vega. I'm a director in wealth management in our Los Angeles office, and I'm also a partner at Aspiriant. As a wealth manager in our exclusive family office group, I've had the opportunity to help families navigate through some very complex cross-border planning, such as pre-immigration planning to and from the US, receiving assets from foreign estates, and more recently, I've been helping families create more global flexibility through the exploration of residency and citizenship investment programs, which is the focus of our discussion today. In today's increasingly interconnected world, we're seeing a growing interest in global mobility solutions among our clients. Some may have cross-border families, international business ventures, overseas career opportunities, or simply just want to create more flexibility for their future. And we found that thoughtful, comprehensive approach is essential for cross-border planning. And that's why we partner with global experts to collectively ensure that every aspect of a client's journey, personal, financial, and legal, receive the attention it requires. And we're delighted to welcome Judy Galst from Henley and Partners as our special guest. Judy has been an invaluable resource to our firm and to many of our clients who are looking for greater international flexibility and mobility. Together, Judy and I will cover the following topics today: immigration migration as a strategic planning tool, the benefits of alternative residencies and citizenships, and specific programs designated to enhance global mobility. Thank you to those who submitted questions in advance. We will be answering questions at the end of our discussion. Also, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any point during the webinar. Also, we're recording the session and we'll make the recording available to you afterwards in case you want to listen back or share the content with others. So with that, Judy, I'll turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and Henley and Partners.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to everybody today. As Jan indicated, I am Managing Director of Private Clients at Henley and Partners. We are an advisory firm. I know our name sounds like a law firm, but we're actually advisors, and we specialize in helping people obtain alternative residence and citizenship by investment. We can also help with citizenship by descent. In my role, I kind of wear two hats. One is I talk directly with clients. I learn about what their goals and objectives are, the makeup of their family, what they're trying to accomplish, and then I can develop a strategy for them and help them understand what options are available to them to help them achieve their goals. And I also work really closely with intermediaries like Aspiriant as an extension of their advisory services in an area that is becoming increasingly popular among Americans.
Thanks, Judy. And as you know, at Aspiriant, we work with many clients across borders. In some situations, we have clients that have moved outside of the US for career or business opportunities. In some situations, the clients engaged us while they were working in the US and then later decided to return to their home countries. And so we continue to work from them from their home country. And then we also have situations where our clients own one or more homes outside the US and spend material amount of time overseas. We also work with clients who permanently reside outside of the US. So all of that being said, as I mentioned, in these recent years, we've had many families and individuals interested in exploring global flexibility through this investment migration. Maybe just to provide some clarity for our participants, can you define investment migration?
Sure. So many countries, about 100 countries in the world, have laws that say if you or your family makes some sort of financial investment in our country, and that investment can vary depending upon the law. It could be an investment in real estate, it can be a contribution, it can be an investment in private equity or venture capital or stock. If you make some level of a financial investment, we will grant you either residence in our country or citizenship in our country. And actually, 90% of the programs are in high income countries. So it's not just poorer nations that have these kinds of programs, although it did start out that way. Many of you may have heard about people that are getting Caribbean passports. And St. Kitts was actually the first country that decided 30 years ago that they needed some way to raise foreign direct investment so that they could pay down their debts and invest in infrastructure and improve the lives of their citizens. And they came up with the idea that we could allow people to make some sort of financial investment in our country and in return grant them citizenship. And today, about 60 jurisdictions actively promote programs, and about 30 of them attract the biggest share of applicants. You may be surprised to know that the United States even has a program which gives people a path to a green card and ultimately to citizenship, as does 26 European Union member states that provide the right to reside in return for making an investment, and all 19 sovereign countries in the G20.
Yeah, oftentimes our conversations with clients center around finding options to maintain their US citizenship in the US and obtain permanent resident visas or citizen options in some of the other countries. So what is the difference between alternative residence and alternative citizenship?
So that's actually a really good question and an important thing to understand. And when I do a consultation with a client, it's really one of the first things that I like to explain because they are different. It doesn't mean one is better than the other, and one could meet your needs and another might not. So it's good to have a good basis on the difference before you start to dive into what might be the right program or solution. So I'll start first by explaining what residence by investment means. So it doesn't mean the ability to have a house in a country. It means having the ability to stay unlimited in a country. So the US passport is very strong. We can go into many countries without even getting a visa, but we can't stay there forever. So if you gain residence rights in a country, you do have the ability to live there 12 months a year for a certain period of time. In many cases, you will get other rights in addition to the ability to live there. You may be able to work, you may get subsidized education, you may get subsidized healthcare. Again, those kinds of things are going to vary depending upon the laws of the country where you gain residence. But it's not permanent. Usually they have expiration dates, so you have to renew them. For example, if you get a residence permit for Greece every 5 years, you must renew it. In Italy, after 2 years, you renew it. Then your next one is good for 3 years. Some will have a path to permanent residency, in which case you won't have to always renew it. At some point, you'll reach a level where it is a lifelong right. It could give you some travel rights. So this is less relevant for people from the United States where we already have a strong passport, but a good example of the travel rights you get are if you become a resident of a country in the Schengen region. The Schengen region are 29 countries in Europe that have borderless travel. And people from countries like the Philippines or South Africa or China or India, every time they want to come into the Schengen region, they have to get something called a Schengen visa. And that can be timely and really make you not have such an easy time to enter those countries. So, a strategy for people with weak passports often is to get a residence in Europe because not only does it give you the ability to live in that country of residence, but it also gives you Schengen access, meaning you can travel into other Schengen countries without getting a Schengen visa. Again, not so relevant for people from the United States, except when we think back to the pandemic, when our passport got blocked, had you had a residence in Europe, you still would have been able to go into Europe. Usually residents will come with conditions or requirements to maintain the residence. For example, if you become a Greek golden visa holder, meaning get a residence to live in Greece, by purchasing real estate, if you sell the real estate, you're not going to be able to renew your visa. Similarly, in Italy, if you invest in stock, which is one route in order to get residence in Italy, if you liquidate the stock, you're not going to be able to renew it. Or Portugal says to maintain it, you must come 14 days every 2 years. If you don't come 14 days every 2 years, they're not going to renew your visa. So there are conditions. And finally, it may have a path to citizenship. The difference with citizenship is that it is a lifelong right. So it's extremely difficult for a country to take away your citizenship. It often can be passed down to future generations. With becoming a citizen, you get a passport, And with that passport, you get international travel rights. So as I said, the US passport's very strong. We can go to over 180 countries without getting a visa. So depending upon what country you get citizenship in, you're going to gain the same international travel rights that have been negotiated for citizens of that country. You'll get access to all country benefits that are extended to citizens, including access to subsidized healthcare, education, the ability to work. And where citizenship is incredibly powerful is in Europe because of the European Union. If you become the citizen of one country in the EU, you get the ability to live, work, conduct business, attend school at subsidized rates in any country in the European Union.
In our conversations with families around investment migration, there's been some situations where clients might have a clear plan to travel and live there for an extended period of time in another country. And then there's other situations where a client may just want to have the ability to travel freely and may have no definitive plans of how frequent or long their visits may be. So how does this compare to some of the trends you're seeing?
So specifically on what you talk about, and we're going to elaborate on this, the vast majority of my clients are not relocating. So we're going to dive into that in a little bit. But I think it might be helpful just to talk a little bit about historically who was interested in getting an alternative residence or citizenship. And frankly, it was not people from the United States or from developed countries. As I said, Henley and Partners has been in business for 25 years, but historically the interest was coming from emerging markets because people in those countries had very different motivations. They often were inclined to relocate. They didn't have access to premium education or healthcare or sophisticated banking systems. They often had weak passports, as I said, so it was really difficult for them to travel. So it made sense for them to get a Caribbean passport, which gave them easier mobility or a residence in Europe. Um, but these things didn't really speak to Americans until about 2020, and that's really when things started to change. And that was with the pandemic. That's when Henley saw its first surge of interest coming from Americans, and we didn't even have offices here at that time. We were servicing all the business out of Canada. But again, people had vacation homes, they had private planes, and with the pandemic, the US passport was blocked from people leaving the country. And that was the first time people started to understand, there is some risk to having only one mobility option. But even Henley, despite the fact that we had like a 227% increase in business in 2020, was reluctant to open in the United States, thinking this is never going to sustain itself. But that is exactly the opposite of what's happening. It's actually surging interest coming from the United States right now. And I want to share a couple statistics to demonstrate how much business we're seeing coming out of here. Um, there was definitely a surge after the election. Uh, but despite that surge, if you were to compare the number of inquiries we're getting from Americans, fourth quarter 2024 to first quarter 2025, we're still up 29%. If you were to go comparing first quarter 2025 to first quarter 2024, we have over 138% increase. We currently have more inquiries coming from Americans than we do from any single nationality. And if you were to go way back and compare what we're seeing here in the United States right now in 2025 compared to 2019, we have over a 1,000% increase in interest. So let me talk a little bit about what is driving all this interest. I mean, the first thing is freedom of movement. As I said, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of people experience for the first time that there is some risk to having one mobility option. And so many people just don't want to be in that position again for whatever reason. God forbid another pandemic or another reason where US passports could potentially be blocked. And it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, some people are also thinking in terms of their retirement and wanting to spend more time in other parts of the world. As I said earlier, we can all go visa free into Europe with a US passport, but we can only stay there for 90 days. And then we have to leave for a full 90 days before we can go back in. So if you're thinking about your retirement years and maybe wanting to spend 4 or 5 months in France or uh, 4 or 5 months in Spain in a row, you're not able to do that with the US passport. And it's time to look at what kind of strategy could you put in place so that you can realize that benefit when you're ready for it. I have clients that have established alternative tax residency, say in Florida, where it's very hot in the summer. And they say, don't want to be in Florida in the heat of the summer. So they get a residence in Italy and they spend 4 months in Italy and then they go back to Florida. So it's not all doom and gloom. But I would say about 85% of the calls that I'm having these days, there is some reference to people saying they want a plan B. They don't want to leave the United States. I mean, most of them think of this really purely as an insurance policy. I had one client say to me, I spend $1 million a year in insurance. This is just another line item. Some are thinking not just of themselves, but they're really thinking about future generations and what the world is going to look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So, yes, they could leave their kids a certain amount of money and maybe they leave a little less, and instead they try to secure a way for them to have a European Union passport so that they have the ability to work in Europe, in any country, or live in Europe, or have global opportunities. Maybe they have businesses and they want to expand them internationally, and you can do so much easier if you have residence or citizenship in another country. The ease of opening bank accounts and conducting business is much easier with that kind of designation. And finally, I would say a lot of people are thinking right now just about diversifying their portfolios. They don't necessarily want to hold all their money in the United States or all their real estate in the United States. And investment migration can really be a strategy that's aligned with that because in most cases you are moving money to another country for some period of time in order to get the ability to have residence or citizenship there, or you're buying real estate, or you're making investments. So in some ways it can be a bonus to diversifying your portfolio, which is something a lot of people want to do today anyway.
Yeah, we're seeing similar things with just wanting that flexibility with the families we're working with as well. And when clients decide to go down that path of exploring a specific country, as part of, when they've made the final decision, we also help them explore the US and foreign income tax and estate planning implications. In our experience, the planning tends to be really unique based on the client's specific situation. I guess with that in mind, what are some of the common questions or misconceptions you see surrounding global residences or citizenship?
So there are a couple. The first is, if I get another citizenship, do I have to renounce my US citizenship? And the answer to that is no. The US does not restrict the number of passports that one person can hold, or residences for that matter. And frankly, I have many clients that are getting more than one option. Some have a small little portfolio of residence and citizenship options. I have actually never had a client that's renouncing. I mean, it is highly very costly for a high net worth person to renounce. But however, if you are planning on renounce, you definitely need my services because you need to have a passport before you do that, a citizenship from another country. But it's not common. You also don't need to relocate. Many programs, such as Italy, Greece, Malta residents, uh, require that you spend no time in the country in order to maintain the ability to potentially live there unlimited. Yes, you will have to go for initial biometrics in order for your residence card to be issued, but once you have it, you have no obligation to go back. So again, for people that are thinking purely in a plan B mentality, having the ability to potentially live unlimited somewhere is great, especially if you don't have the requirement to do so.
You touched on passports. Is there a difference between obtaining a foreign passport through birth or ancestry versus acquiring a passport by making an investment in a foreign country?
Yep, I'm going to talk about that in 1 second. I want to just cover one more
Okay.
common question that people have, and that is related to taxes, because we all know as Americans that we are always going to be taxed on our worldwide wealth here. And so a lot of people worry that by getting another residence or another citizenship, that automatically is going to mean something bad from the perspective of taxes, potentially double taxation. So I would preface this by saying that I'm not licensed to give tax advice, and I want to talk about this from a very high level. Also to let you know that whenever we do work with a client, that we have local tax professionals as well as partners like Aspiriant, where we work together to make sure that clients understand what, if any, tax consequences there could be for any action that they might be taking in terms of expanding their residency or citizenship options. But in general, you do not become a tax resident by becoming a citizen or a resident of another country, unless you live in the United States. So for most of the countries that we do programs with, you actually have to live there 183 days before you have the risk of becoming a tax resident. Now, if you were to generate income in that country, even if you're not living there for very long, you will pay tax on that, and likely it's going to be deductible against your US tax. So for example, if you purchase real estate in Greece as your qualifying method of getting the Greek Golden Visa and you turn it into an investment property and you generate rental income, you will pay tax on that. But in terms of tax on your US based income, that's not going to come into play unless you are defined as a tax resident. And even then, there are going to be countries that have tax treaties or flat tax options or many different things that can be looked at so that it doesn't have to be something that has a negative consequence. But it is important and it's something that has to be looked at as part of the process. I would say 183 days is typically the magic number, but there are some exceptions, like Switzerland is 90 days, and other countries that might say something like France, which is if France is just the center of your economic interest, or you're spending more time here than you're spending elsewhere. So these are the kind of things that we look at as we start to dive into what program really might make sense for someone.
Can you talk a little bit more about the cost of shedding a US citizenship? I mean, from your perspective?
So you definitely need to have a lawyer that specializes in expatriation planning. But if you have over $2 million, it's very costly. There is an exit tax, and there are a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration in terms of your limits, in terms of being able to come back into the United States, which often is important to people because a lot of times you have children or grandchildren or other family members that are here. So for people that call me and say, I'm thinking about renouncing my citizenship, I don't want to pay US tax anymore, what can be a new citizenship I can get? The first stop is we got to get a lawyer involved, and you have to understand exactly what that's going to mean to you, because once people figure that out, they're like, "Ugh, I don't think I'm actually going to go down that path." Anyway, I want to jump back to that question you asked me about citizenship by ancestry, because look, we're a land of immigrants, and there are people here, myself included, who are eligible for citizenship by ancestry. I personally am getting German citizenship because Germany and Austria, in the very recent past, passed laws that said if you or any members of your family fled due to Nazi persecution, you and all future generations are entitled to citizenship. And if you remember from the beginning of my presentation, I talked about the power of an EU passport. So, like, some of my friends are like, "What do you want with a German passport?" And I explain it's not just a German passport. I mean, this is an EU passport. My kids can go and work in Europe without getting visas. They could live there. My brother's son hasn't gone to college yet. He could pay much lower rates to send his child to college in Europe potentially. So every country is going to have different rules about what will allow you to qualify, how many generations back. It's a pretty complex process per country. We have established relationships with attorneys in countries around the world, from Austria, Germany, Italy, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Romania, and Poland. I can't remember if I said Poland already. In any case, if you think you could qualify, we could definitely make a referral for you, and they will be able to assess your case. But it's not like I've had clients call me like they did 23andMe and they're showing they have some Polish blood. I'm like, no. Poland has very strict rules, one of which might, for all of you that are already getting excited about it, is that your ancestor had to have been in Poland up until 1921. If they left before, Poland is very likely not going to work for you, because Poland became a country in 1918. They didn't have a census until 1921, and there's going to be no documentation to prove the lineage. But the rights of someone who gets citizenship by ancestry are the same as the rights as someone who gets it via investment. So if you can qualify, it's certainly worth looking into.
Great. So in our experience, a lot of you had mentioned the EU earlier, and I think that's kind of been the same as what we've been seeing. It's been one of the more popular programs, and Canada. What are the most popular programs you're seeing among your American clients?
So I want to give a snapshot first of sort of the most popular programs that we as Henley and Partners handle. Now, some of these are countries that are not necessarily appealing to Americans. We have 60 offices around the world, and what interests someone who's living in Asia may be very different than what interests someone who lives in the United States. So I'll focus today just on what I'm seeing of interest among Americans, and I'm going to start with the Caribbean. People are probably like, why would I want a passport to the Caribbean? But there actually are some pretty significant benefits. First of all, for people who are looking for an alternative mobility option and they want that guaranteed right of a citizenship, the Caribbean is actually very popular because it approves very quickly and it's very affordable. you can cover an entire family by making either a $250,000 gift or investing in real estate, which can be sold in 5 to 7 years for around 300,000. Now, when I say an entire family, this is a really important part of the consultative process because the ages of kids can have a big impact on whether you can do one application or whether you have to do multiple applications. And usually, when the kids get into the 20s, it becomes a little more complicated. So, in the Caribbean, Antigua's got a lot of flexibility. Kids up to the age of 30 can be on a parent's application. Their siblings can be included. If they have children already, they can be included. So you can really have a lot of people doing that one application at those low amounts that I just described to get citizenship. Antigua also allows unmarried siblings. So even if you have children that are over age 30, if you have unmarried children at age 34 and 38, you could do one application and have both of them on it. The other countries have some different limitations with regard to ages, but there are also some very positives about the other countries. There are 5 countries in the Caribbean that offer citizenship: Antigua, Barbuda, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and Dominica. I would say the bulk of my clients are doing Antigua, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis for a variety of reasons, which I can dive into if I do a consultation. Um, but the real estate can be really interesting, especially if you have a large extended family, because as I said, each family unit has to invest about 300,000. But I have people that'll buy a villa and subdivide it into shares. So the grandparents take 300,000. They have 3 adult children that are all married, and each of them have 3 kids. They each take a share. They buy a villa for 1.2 million. They all get Caribbean citizenship. They have a place they can spend time in. They can make it an investment property or use it for a combination. And in 5 years, they can sell it. And chances are they'll make money on it or at least get their investment back. So Caribbean is definitely something that people like to think of, especially if they want something quickly. They might often do it in parallel with something else that might take longer. Speaking of longer, let's talk a little bit about Europe. And I want to start by talking about the Portugal Golden Visa, because you've probably heard about a lot of people who are interested in the Portugal Golden Visa. And there are a couple of reasons why Portugal is so popular. One, because it's a great place to live, and great climate, great wine, um, great people. But it also has a reasonable path to citizenship. And when I say reasonable, I mean although it takes a long time, Portugal does not require you to live there for a long period during the years that you are striving to become a citizen, unlike a country like Greece or Italy. So, for example, in Italy, you can become a resident there very easily, but they say if you want to become a citizen, you have to live here for 6 months a year for 10 years. In Greece, again, pretty easy to become a resident. I'm going to go into the details in a sec. But if you want to become a citizen, you have to live in Greece for 6 months a year for 7 years. Now, 6 months is that magic number I talked about earlier when I said you become a tax resident at 183 days. So, not ideal. Most people are not thinking about spending 6 months a year for multiple years in a country just to get to EU citizenship. Portugal, on the other hand, says you have to come 14 days every 2 years. So that's one big positive. I can get clients submitted really fast for Portugal, usually in about 2 to 3 months. The challenge with Portugal is that it's so popular that my clients are waiting over 3 years to get the Portugal Golden Visa. So this is not an immediate plan B. You cannot move to Portugal until you get the Golden Visa. What does happen, however, is when you get submitted for the Portugal Golden Visa, which, as I said, I can do in about 2 or 3 months, the clock towards your ability to apply for citizenship starts ticking, and that has to tick for 5 years. So let's hypothetically say I get you submitted in 3 months. What does that involve? Opening a bank account, getting a tax ID number for you, helping you decide how you want to meet the financial requirement. In the case of Portugal, you can invest either 250,000 euros. Actually, invest is a bad word. You can contribute 250,000 euros to an approved arts or cultural organization. This will not be tax deductible. Or you can invest 500,000 in venture capital or private equity. And there are many, many funds you can choose from, and you can amortize across several funds. So we can get you submitted pretty quickly, 2 to 3 months, and then you wait. And eventually you'll be called, or will be called, to tell us you're entitled to come for your biometrics. We'll then schedule your appointment for you to come for biometrics. That could be 2 years, 2.5 years from when you submit. And then you wait again. And then eventually your Portugal Golden Visa will be issued, at which point you can move to Portugal and live there unlimited if you want. but you only have an obligation at that point to spend 14 days every 2 years. At 2 years, you also have to renew the visa because your initial visa will only be good for 2 years. That is done in Portugal. And you have to pass an elementary level Portuguese language test or take 150 hours of Portuguese language school. At year 5, if you have checked all those boxes, in addition to maintaining your investment through this entire time, you are eligible to apply for citizenship. And that will take another 20 to 26 months. So you're looking at a 7-year path to EU citizenship. The other wrinkle with Portugal is that if you want to include your children on the application, they must remain in full-time school throughout the entire process. So when I start talking to families that have kids that are in their 20s, unless they're planning to go to medical school for the next 7 to 10 years, they're going to need multiple applications. Now, parents 65 and older can be on an adult child's application in Portugal, so there can be some strategies to limit the number of applications that you have to have, but it's not always the best fit for someone that wants a solution for all of their children and their children are already nearing adulthood. So that's Portugal. Other residence programs which could be of interest might be Malta, Greece, or Italy. These are programs that allow you to live unlimited just in the one country that I mentioned. Greece invests as little as 250,000 euros in real estate. These are refurbished apartments, so probably not ones that most people on this call are going to live in personally, but it could be an investment property. Or if you wanted to have a home that you wanted to actually use, you can invest 400,000 in smaller islands per application or 800,000 in larger islands like Athens or Mykonos. You can combine multiple family members into the purchase of one home, similar to what I described in the Caribbean. So let's say it's parents and 3 adult children. Greece allows parents to be on an adult child's application, so I can combine 2 applications there. Then I've got 2 other adult children, so I've got 3 investments that I need to make. If I'm in a smaller island, you could buy something for 1.2 million, 400,000 euros times 3. If I'm in Athens or Mykonos or a larger part, then it's going to be 800,000 times 2, 2.4 million. Buying, a nice property can be used as an investment property for personal use or a combination thereof. Italy, invest 500,000 in Italian stock or 250,000 in Italian startup. The Italian startup is going to be riskier and it's also going to have a mandatory holding period, probably of 7 years. Now, you can't liquidate your stock either. You're going to lose your residence. But if you were to change your mind and said like 4 years in, like, I don't want this Italian residence anymore, and you went the 500,000 stock route, you just sell your stock. If you went the startup route, you're not going to be able to get your money out until you reach the mandatory holding period. Italy, the children's age is 21. So, I'm sorry, 18. So again, this often can require multiple applications if you want to try and cover your kids. Malta has a residence program which gives you the ability either to lease property or purchase property and pay some other fees and get the ability to live unlimited in Malta. The kids' age cutoff is 29, so it can be a really good affordable solution. You just have to feel like the ability to live unlimited in Malta is appealing to you. Now you'll notice that I have 4 asterisks next to Malta, and that's because, as some of you may have heard, Malta used to be the premier choice among people that wanted a fast path to an EU passport. They had a program where people had to invest in real estate and pay a large fee and do some other things. And in about 14 to 16 months, they would be granted Maltese citizenship, which is a member of the European Union, and then you could go and live in Switzerland or anywhere else that you wanted. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks ago, the European Court of Justice decided they don't like this program and shut it down. And it was a high court decision. So that program no longer exists. And therefore, the limitation on how to get an EU passport has really increased. You either do it by descent, you do it very slowly through Portugal, or there's another path through Austria. But the minimum out-of-pocket expense is probably going to be somewhere around 4 million euros. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on it. If anybody on this call, is interested in Austria, we should talk about it offline. Finally, to wrap up, I want to discover a couple other programs that are of interest. I'm going to start with New Zealand, which recently revised their program on April 1st and has made it much, much more attractive to investors. They really want to attract foreign direct investment. This is not a path to citizenship, but it is a path to permanent residence. So it's not something that has to be renewed. You can either invest 5 million New Zealand or 10 million New Zealand. It's about 60 cents on the dollar. So let's say investing about 2.8 USD or double that. If you do the 2.8 USD route, you have to invest it in private equity, venture capital, or private credit and hold it there for 3 years. We work with Forsyth Barr, which is the largest independent financial advisory firm that would work with Aspiriant to design a portfolio that you felt comfortable with in terms of the risk slash rewards. You have to hold your money in New Zealand for 3 years, although you actually do not have to invest it right away. You can do it very gradually over that 3 year period. And at the end of 3 years, you can liquidate your investment um, and you have permanent residence for life. There's one other rule, and that is the main applicant has to spend 21 days in New Zealand during those 3 years. And all the other family members have to enter and exit New Zealand for at least a day, 1 year after the visa is issued. So let's talk a little bit about the family. For New Zealand, children have to be single and not working full time and under the age of 25 at the point of approval. Approval will take roughly 8 months after we submit the application, or maybe a little bit less. So timing can be pretty critical here for people that have kids in their early 20s that this sounds interesting to, because you definitely only want to have to make one investment. What does it mean to have permanent residency for life? Well, it's pretty powerful in New Zealand. It means that you never have to come back to New Zealand again after those 3 years, or at any point in your lifetime. If you decide you want to move to New Zealand, you have the right to do that. You can even vote. You have full right that citizens get. So you have access to health care. You can work. The only things you can't do are compete in the Olympics for New Zealand, have very top level security jobs, or run for parliament. So for a lot of my clients, this is often an add on. They're like, don't really want to leave the United States, but like if things really changed here, I think the best quality of life for me might be in Europe, but if it's so bad I don't want to be in the United States, New Zealand doesn't sound so bad because it's English speaking. You can really have a career there. Your kids can have careers there. It's supposed to be incredible. You can apparently surf in the morning and ski in the afternoon. So like outdoorsy people love it. And if you have the liquidity to put $3 million there, which could be part of a diversification of asset strategy for 3 years, it's a great benefit to have. So New Zealand is definitely becoming more popular. Australia does not have an investment program, but they have something called a global talent visa. And there are other countries that have citizenship by merit or residence by merit programs. I'll talk specifically about Australia, but there are others too. Portugal being one has a talent visa as well. Australia basically says that if you're extraordinary and under the age of 55, I should add, extraordinary in areas that are important to our economy. So this could be very entrepreneur or business driven, even if you have a private equity fund that's done really well, but it's invested primarily in an area that's of interest to them, whether it be healthcare or biomedical engineering or robotics. Um, we might just invite you to have a visa because we want you to contribute to our society and not charge you anything. So I have a couple clients that are extraordinary and they are doing this visa. It's granted for 5 years. Your family can be granted the visa with you. The visa also allows you to live in New Zealand. The one consideration is it has to be renewed after 5 years. And if you didn't contribute to Australian society, you're not getting it renewed. So, how do you contribute to the society? I mean, there could be a range of things you can do. You can spend time there. You could open a business there that created jobs. You could own real estate there. But this is not a long term strategy if you don't really intend to make some contributions to the society. Um, Finally, I'll touch on Costa Rica, which also is of increasing interest among a lot of our clients, especially LGBTQ, transgender clients, very friendly, as is Malta, by the way. Um, Very affordable to gain residence in Costa Rica. You essentially just have to demonstrate that you have $2,500 a month in passive income. Most people will have that with rental income, interest income, dividend income. But if you can't demonstrate that by having a Costa Rican CPA review your balance sheet, which we oversee. You could deposit $60,000 in a Costa Rican bank, which would be put into $2,500 a month shares, which would show that you have the $2,500 a month in passive income. Or you could invest in real estate, $150,000 per application. For families, children should probably be under the age of 23 because It starts out as a temporary visa, which is good for 2 years and then has to be renewed. At year 3, it transitions to permanent residency, but that can't happen if the child is over 25. So usually we would tell someone that's on the borderline, just get your own application for the child at that level, because otherwise it's going to be problems to transition to permanent residency. As a temporary resident, you cannot work in Costa Rica, but you could work remotely. It takes a year to approve, but Costa Rica says you can stay unlimited as long as you have submitted your application. You do have to be able to enter the country on your US passport, but that should probably be likely. I don't see Costa Rica necessarily blocking Americans anytime soon. Once you get approved, you have an obligation to pay into Social Security in Costa Rica, $300 a month per application. That covers you for health care and a pension. You have to spend 1 day in Costa Rica to apply, and then once you are granted the temporary visa, which ultimately transitions to permanent residency, you have to spend 1 day a year to maintain it. So I feel like I touched on like a good range of programs, really the most popular ones for Americans, and I want to make sure that we leave time to have questions and answers. So should we
Yes.
open it up to the stage?
Yes, thank you. So just a follow-on question to the Malta program, is that both the citizenship and the permanent residency program? Is it both programs that are?
No, the residence program remains untouched, and I actually have some of my Malta clients that have transitioned to Malta residence
Mm.
because they think that perhaps Malta will design a program more comparable to Portugal, where clients that start out as a resident will ultimately have a path to citizenship. This is purely speculation. This has not been announced. It also is the cheapest of European residence options. So many people see it as a very good solution for them right now, given that we don't have a path to citizenship through the country.
And you covered a lot of the nuances between the various programs and the ages of children and things like that. Because I know in some of the factors that we talk about with the families that we're working with are, which ones can cover children. The other question we get often, and this is a question that came up, is are there programs where you can have multiple citizenships, or we should, be careful because they won't allow other
Okay,
second
yes,
citizenships.
that's a good question. And I meant to address that when we were talking about dual citizenship. So the US does not place a limit on the number of citizenships you can have. There are a few countries that do not recognize dual citizenship with the United States, Spain being one of them. If you get it by descent, there's a waiver, but if you were to get citizenship in Spain through another vehicle, which actually is not so easy, Spain could potentially say, like, we expect you to renounce your US citizenship. Now, there's never been a case of someone that got Spanish citizenship and didn't renounce. We don't know exactly what would happen, but legally, that would not be a great strategy to do just because they don't recognize dual citizenship. Austria is another country that says we allow you to have more than one citizenship, but once you get Austrian citizenship, we don't want you to have additional citizenships. We might grant you permission if you ask, but it's not guaranteed. So for clients that are doing the more expensive route to citizenship, which actually is a really fascinating program, so anyone that can afford it should definitely call me so I can explain it. If you also thought maybe, yeah, I should get a Caribbean citizenship, we'd want to do that first. It takes 4 to 6 months. We'd get you St. Kitts citizenship while we're working on Austria so that you don't run into the problem that you get Austria and they're like, oh, I can't get that Caribbean passport.
I think we have a few people raising their hands, so I was just gonna see if anybody has a question, please type it into the chat as well, and I'm answering questions through that. So just wanted to let people know about that again, and moving on to more Q&A. So I guess in terms of red flags, because it does seem like there's politics that come into play here, similar to the Malta program. What other red flags do you think that people should be looking out for as they're evaluating programs?
I mean, I don't know that red flags is like there's anything that pops in my mind about a red flag. I don't know of another program that I think is going to close imminently, but it happens. I mean, we saw Malta close, and that was pretty shocking because the EU Advocate General had actually found in Malta's favor, and so people did not expect the High Court to reverse that, since that's apparently never happened ever in the world, in history. But programs do close. The Spain Golden Visa actually closed not too long ago because there's a housing crisis in Spain, as there is in much of Europe, and these golden visas have gotten a lot of flack for it. And I can't say that it's not also understandable, because the programs have historically allowed people to qualify via purchasing real estate, and that has had an impact on local housing prices. I mean, I think there are other factors in terms of shortage of housing and other things. So, will we see programs that rely on real estate to change? It's possible. There are not many left that allow you to qualify via real estate. Greece does. UAE has a real estate route, although I see them as being less likely to have an impact and change their program related to real estate. So I think that's something that we might see happening in the industry. I think because of the Malta decision, we might start to see more citizenship by merit programs or citizenship by talent kind of programs, and programs that are a little less defined as transactional, which was one of the concerns that the EU had with Malta. And then just in terms of considerations that people want to think about, I mean, when I do a consultation, these are the kind of things I would ask. But um, is this really like something you want to stick in a safe and never use? In which case, we may really focus on things where quality of life is less of a priority and more just having something as a last resort that you're glad you have, but you really don't think you're going to use. Or is this something like you could really see using? Like, yeah, let's hope things calm down in the world. And I do want to spend several months a year in Europe. And therefore, where we choose to give you that ability is going to weigh much more into it. And finally, I would say that the age of your children is just a big factor. And you don't know the programs well enough to know how that's going to impact you, but it is going to be part of the discussion that we're going to have with you, because it's going to probably make some programs more appealing than others from a cost perspective.
Can you talk a little bit about US citizens with non-US citizen spouses and leveraging the program? How does that
Yes,
work?
yes. Okay, so I'll talk about my own situation, because I am getting German citizenship if it ever gets approved. It's been in there for 17 months, by the way. These things do not happen quickly. And my husband's always joking, like, oh, Judy's going off to Europe. She will leave me behind. And I always say, no, no. Europe has a law that says if you're married to an EU citizen, you can live in Europe with your spouse. So it's ideal, obviously, if both partners can have the same documentation, but there is a solution for especially people that can qualify via descent, one spouse and the other doesn't, that they are not going to have to be separated if one decides to go off to Europe. Similarly, minor children, if the children didn't qualify, as long as they are under the age of 18, they are able to live with an EU spouse in Europe. The one wrinkle is like they have to be able to get out of the United States to get into Europe, which is a very doomsday scenario. But people do bring this up when I consult with them during the pandemic. Like if I had my German passport, I could have gone into Europe, even though I didn't want to leave my house. But my husband couldn't, because like he would have to have entered with his US passport was blocked.
Yeah. Okay. And then I guess just revisiting one of the slides you had talked about before about the reasons why people pursue these programs. I know some of concerns from people are around, the US tax system, and will these programs, how does that help if that's the main concern, US taxes, is that, will
Yeah.
the US from a tax perspective, I don't know if that's something you
Yeah.
see.
So I think some people, I just had a client that came and met with me in New York, and the first thing out of his mouth is like, tell me how I avoid US taxes through investment migration. And I'm like, I'm not the person you want to talk to, because you really can't. I mean, you're a US person, you're always going to pay US tax unless you renounce. I have clients from other countries like Canada. I'm dealing with someone who has $100 million, and he can sever his tax relationship with Canada without renouncing his citizenship, and he is going to get alternative tax residency in another country. But for US persons, there really isn't a strategy there.
Yeah, and we talked about renouncing, and most people don't go down that path.
Correct. Not high net worth people.
Um, One of the questions here is, at what level of assets do families need to be able to, consider or have in order to consider these programs?
So there's really no minimum. I would say on average, people are not spending more than 10% of their net worth probably on a program. But I have plenty of clients doing Caribbean, Portugal, Costa Rica, where they are not wealthy people. Um, this is just a priority for them. Um, they have to have, some discretionary income, but, you know, you don't have to be extraordinarily wealthy. That being said, I mean, a lot of our clients are wealthy and they just don't have to worry about it as much. But
Yeah.
there are many options that are not necessarily overly expensive.
And it sounds like you had referenced a couple of amounts throughout the presentation. It sounds like 250 to 500,000 typically are the investments
Yes,
amounts.
yes. And, especially with the Portugal, I mean, it is an investment. It's not like giving it away. So you
Mhm.
just have to be without that liquidity for a period of time. But it's not like it's going to be gone forever, I guess, unless the investment tanks. But hopefully you pick a very conservative one and that doesn't happen.
Um, I guess, just curious, what percentage of your clients begin the process and then might maybe abandon it after they realize how complicated or long it takes? Do you have a high rate of people
No,
abandoning the program?
because before you get started, you're going to have a really good understanding about what's involved and the timing. I mean, look, I'm pretty honest with you about Portugal. You're looking at 7 years. So it's not common for people to get started and stop. Um, we do a lot to try and make it as easy as possible. And sometimes it can get frustrating. Kind of make the analogy where like your accountant. I mean, you can't call your accountant and say like, okay, do my taxes. You have to give them paperwork. And there are things you're going to have to do. There are going to be things we can't do for you. We can't go for your medical test. We don't know the names of your brothers and sisters, which some countries want on the form. But it's all manageable and it's all doable. And we're very good about setting expectations so that people know what the process is going to involve. So most people don't go so far as to get engaged with us unless they really want to try and see it through.
Can you talk about how you support people going through the process and identifying investments and things like that? How do you usually um, or where maybe you can talk a little bit just about the process and all the way through
Sure.
where you start and then where you stop.
Yeah,
Maybe
sure.
additional services along the way that you provide.
Yeah, very good question. So we don't charge for consultation. We really only charge if we can be of legitimate service to the client. So I have some clients that I talk to many times, and I have some clients that like it's shocking. It's like one call, and the next thing I know, they want to start the process. It's really wide ranging in terms of how quickly people decide to move forward. If you decide that we can be of legitimate service to you, the first step is we do a due diligence on you. This is a standard background check. Clients have to give us a copy of their passport page, biodata page, fill out a form giving us certain bank information and a source of funds document so that we know that they have legitimate funds to pay for it. And that usually takes a couple of days. Then they would sign our agreement and then we'll pay a retainer. So we charge a flat fee based on the country and the number of occupants. So for the Caribbean, for a single, it's $30,000. For a family of 2 to 4, it's 40,000. For a family of more than 4, it's 50,000. The retainer would be 10,000 and the balance would be due at the point of the application being submitted. For Europe, most of the programs are 25,000 single, 30,000 euros family 2 to 4, 35,000 for more than 4. But every client gets a full financial estimate. So they're going to see exactly not just our fees, but what the government might also charge or what the investment level is and what could be property taxes and all those kinds of things. Our role is A to Z. Now, we're not financial advisors and we're not real estate brokers. However, for programs that require a financial investment or a real estate purchase, we're going to make the connections to you to the experts that can facilitate that part of it. So, for example, in Portugal, there are many, many funds that are qualified for the venture capital or private equity. And we have a team in Portugal that will give a top level list to you of maybe 10 funds that our clients have done successfully applied for the golden visa with. And you'll see on it, like, is it open-ended? Is it closed-ended? Is it conservative? Is it risky based on like what the projection returns are? What are they investing in? Is it something I care about or something I'm repulsed by? And then you'll decide like which ones are of interest to you. At that point, we will introduce you and Aspiriant directly to the fund managers, and they will provide you with the prospectus and the past performance and present to you what their fund is all about so that you on your own can make an educated decision about how you want to invest. Portugal actually allows you to amortize it among multiple funds, but there is going to be a fair level of compliance for each fund. So you have to keep that in mind in terms of how much paperwork you can tolerate. In the case of real estate, in the Caribbean, you can't just like spend $300,000 and say, oh, I made the investment, I'm applying for citizenship. They have to be government approved projects. A lot of them are not even built yet. So our real estate team does a due diligence on all the approved projects, and actually there are very few that we recommend because we want to recommend projects that we feel legitimately will be built and that you will have an exit strategy. So for example, there's two developers that we work with in Antigua. There's currently two developers that we work in St. Kitts, and we will again facilitate Zoom calls with the developers so that you can understand what the investment option is, what the rental projections are, et cetera. Similar in Greece. So we're facilitating all angles of it, even if it's not something that we do in-house. In terms of ancillary services, we have a concierge service. So whenever you're traveling to any country for biometrics, or if you just want to visit there, we can plan wonderful trips for you. We have an education service. So for the few clients of, I actually have like 5 clients using the education service that are relocating to other parts of the world, from children preschool through postgraduate. We can help find schools. We have a tax advisory. So from a top level, we can provide some tax information, but typically we're working with firms like Aspiriant as well as local tax providers in each country to provide the tax advice. We have a membership called Civis Mundi, which is a new initiative that we've done. We have just such fascinating clients, and they often are like-minded and like to share experiences together. So many of our clients join Civis Mundi, and we do events throughout the year around the world with world leaders and other dignitaries where our clients get to meet with people and have interesting dialogue. So those are some of our ancillary services.
I guess I know we're hitting the top of the hour and there are lots of questions. So I was just going to let everyone know that if we don't get to your question, we will have somebody following up with you. But I guess, is there any type of client that maybe this may not be the right path for them, considering these investment migration programs? Who is the ideal client, and I guess who might not also be right for?
Okay. Not right for anyone that has committed a felony. We will be eliminating you as soon as we do the background check. Some countries could potentially require health insurance, and it can become an issue if there is a pre-existing condition. So I wouldn't say that's specifically age related, but health can be a factor. New Zealand does require a chest x-ray. They are looking for tuberculosis, and that you do have to have a medical exam from a New Zealand doctor within network in the United States. And I have had one client where they had a medical condition. We're probably going to be able to get a medical waiver, but sometimes medical things can be a factor. I don't know
I
any
guess on
other.
that note, is age, I know that you and I had talked about before about for some of the talent, age could be, are there
Yes.
other age considerations?
Um, Not to the extent that you're precluded, except for example, I know that it's incredibly difficult to get approved for the age-related for the Australia talent visa if you're over 55. But like a program like Portugal, where you're waiting 3 years to get the golden visa and 7 years to become an EU citizen, when a client tells me they're like in their 80s and they think they want the Portugal golden visa, I'm probably going to also make some other suggestions.
All right. Well, I know we're hitting close to the top of the hour, so I wanted to thank you, Judy, for joining us in this timely and relevant conversation. We appreciate all your knowledge and partnership that you've been bringing to many of our client situations. And thanks to the participants for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, if we didn't get to your question, an Aspiriant team member will follow up with you. And know that our Aspiriant team is here to help any individual and families who are, already have people abroad, are beginning to build international footprints through business, career, life, lifestyle, legacy. Whether you're exploring a second citizenship or needing to coordinate cross-border tax and estate strategies, we're here to help you navigate and bring clarity to such a complex and evolving landscape. I also wanted to remind you that we are recording this video, so if you'd like to rewatch it or send it to others, a recording will be coming to you by email if you registered. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you again, Judy.
My pleasure.